The first Maze Runner was actually very good. Though we don't get much introduction to the broader societal problem in this movie, it's still a very action-packed film with lots of unexpected twists. And I actually hesitate to say twists because they're not exactly twists, but simply aspects of the maze getting revealed to Thomas or changing from the norm. Every 10 minutes there's some new problem, like Teresa showing up in her box being the last one ever, Ben getting attacked in broad daylight, Thomas and Minho having to stay overnight in the maze with Albie, them finding a way out, the doors literally not closing and the grievers showing up. And everything that happens feels like it falls into such a perfectly logical and chronological plotline. Like the cause and effect in this movie is something else. The cinematography and editing during the action sequences is also really well done. Like that entire first sequence after he gets out of the box and he's running and then finally he sees the maze. So good. This movie is so contained, and yet we get the interesting premise of the maze. We get to see these friendships form that'll last throughout the entire series and become the main reason we want to follow the entire trilogy. We see this mini society with the boys and how they run things a million times better than those idiots from Lord of the Flies, aka the world's most boring and awful book. And then of course the conflict naturally arising. It comes with a really nice theme of, do you keep your life as it is even if it's not all it could be? Or do you take a massive risk to get out of your situation and be free?
Yeah, you've been here 3 years and you're still here, Gally. Maybe you should start doing things a little differently.
That's where the whole Gally versus Thomas thing comes up, because from Gally's point of view, everything was fine and dandy in the Glade until Thomas showed up and now everyone's dying. But from Thomas's point of view, they have to get out of here because ultimately this isn't life and they don't really belong here. Also, the way information is revealed in this movie needs to be studied because so many screenwriters struggle with info dumping and over-exposition so they can tell the audience everything they need to know immediately. Maze Runner only reveals backstories and explanations bit by bit, and naturally, like when Thomas wonders why can't they go into the maze, and then the doors start closing right in front of him so he gets his answer by that actually happening. It would be really overwhelming for both him and the audience to get info dumped about every single thing that goes down with the maze and the Glade within the first 5 minutes of the movie. We also get some flashes about Thomas's past until we finally learn that he was part of the group of scientists that put everyone down there in the maze. But even now, they still don't tell us the whole story since the characters themselves don't remember. Seriously, people need to learn from this natural spacing out of exposition. Even by the end of the movie, they don't spend the entire time info dumping about the purpose of the maze and what happened with the rest of the world. We simply find out, along with the characters, that the rest of the world has been scorched by the sun, and it's practically just barren land out there. And plus there's this virus that turns you into a zombie type thing they call a crank. That's it, and then they get SWAT teamed out of there, and boom, the end. The way these 3 movies go from one to the next, it feels very much like 3 parts of a whole story that has been split up rather than 3 stories in succession that make up a larger story. Unfortunately, the second movie, The Scorch Trials, kind of drags a bit. There's a lot of great action sequences in this one as well, including the beginning, which seems to be the case for all 3 of these movies, each one starting with a bang. Like, they do not waste time. We find out that they weren't the only maze, and rather than being rescued from the people who were testing on them, these people are still them, so Thomas and crew gotta get out. More great action sequences and an emotional scene involving losing a friend in the middle of the dunes and meeting Brenda and Jorge and catching up with the right arm. Like, it's all a good watch, but ultimately it's not like much happened, really. They essentially escaped and met a bunch of people and then escaped again and met a bunch more people, and then of course the right arm gets attacked because of Teresa's bitch ass, but then they escape again. There are probably 3 main things that happen in this movie. They reach the group that'll help them fight Wicked and get to a safe haven, they use Thomas's blood to temporarily cure Brenda, and Teresa's betrayal leading to Minho's capture. Again, it's not a bad movie, it's a great watch and it's pretty interesting and a strong core group of characters to hang out with. And we also finally get a look at the broader scope of things in the outside world. They introduce a main theme of the series, exploring the ethics in science. Like, is it worth sacrificing a few to save the many? Is it worth putting all these probable immunes through all this dangerous life-threatening testing if it can mean a cure for the virus? And they get a lot more into this in the last movie, The Death Cure. The third movie doesn't really feel like a dystopian, to be honest. Like, after their train heist, they end up traveling to a walled city, and it's a typical city like the cities we have right now. And the areas outside the wall are kind of like regular city outskirts. This whole movie's mainly about rescuing Minho, and to do that, they have to get to Teresa first. The whole rescuing the immunes and getting the serum and finding Minho section of the movie is really fantastic. Like when Brenda sends up the flare and Frypan pulls up the entire bus, that's not something you'll likely see in any other movie. Though parts of the ending, especially with Jansen and Teresa, definitely dragged a lot. It's also really sad because of what happens with one of our main guys, but it kind of gets overshadowed by the weird-ass love story between Thomas and Teresa. It's not even really a love story, it's just that throughout the series, they have this shared history they can't remember until Teresa gets her memory back, but somehow Thomas still cares about her greatly even after her betrayal, and we're supposed to feel bad for her after she saves his life and then dies? No thanks. They tried so hard to make it seem like Thomas and Teresa had this love for each other, but y'all can't base this on stuff that happened in the past and off screen and with one party having no memory of it. Thomas caring about Newt, Minho, Frypan, like all of that makes sense because these dudes have been through it together.
Look, even if we find Minho, there's no guarantee we make it back from this.
Well, we started this together. May as well end it that way too.
Let's go get him back.
And yeah, Teresa also went through a lot of that stuff with them, but she was only in the maze for like a few days, and during the second movie, she was acting all shady up until her betrayal. I think they should have been siblings instead, because first of all, the casting, Dylan and Kaya already look like they could be related. And second, them being siblings creates an automatic bond that doesn't require a backstory to make either party care about the other. Like, that's your sister, so of course you're gonna feel conflicted. It doesn't make sense for Thomas to have feelings for her at all. Like, you barely know her, and also for him to continue having them after the betrayal that got his friend captured. And then, of course, they tried to do a mini love triangle as well with Brenda. Like, please give it a rest. Aside from the forced romance stuff, though, this is a pretty good movie as well. I like how they take us into the labs and we see Teresa helping this kid and then telling Minho his blood helped that kid. Like, we're seeing why this is justified in her eyes, at least. But we also see the absolute psychological hell Minho has to go through and why it isn't justified in his eyes. Them realizing Thomas's blood cured Brenda completely was also cool, but damn, just 3 minutes earlier and they could have saved Ferb. This movie also has some really nice cinematography of the city, especially when it's burning. Scorch Trials had some cool shots too, like when they were all walking in a wide shot and stopped when they heard the gunshot because that meant their friend was dead. Overall, all these movies are pretty nice to look at and fun to watch, and while the overall dystopian theme is pretty simple, that's completely fine because there's also themes like friendship and working together and standing by each other and taking action to change your life. Sure, the second and third movies could have done with some screenplay revisions, but it doesn't prevent enjoyment of the series. I've watched it twice so far, and I wouldn't be opposed to watching it again because the characters are cool and the action sequences are great. Divergent should have taken notes because ironically the premise of these two series wasn't that different. In both you have post-disaster or war experiment in secluded walled areas that lead to the test subjects going after the people who were willing to sacrifice them like this. So how the hell did Divergent manage to screw up their storyline so badly? See how Maze Runner left the maze in the first movie and continued without loss of premise, but Divergent didn't leave Chicago until the end of the second movie? No wonder it dragged so much.